Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our Fireside chat with CZ, where we would like to discuss connecting CeFi with DeFi. And some of you might know CZ. He's the CEO and founder of a company called Binance. I think you might come across them. CZ, you probably heard this question already quite a lot of times, but some of our audience are still keen on it, including myself, to be honest, because I know that Binance is one of the biggest players in the crypto market, and when you're looking back at what you did, basically, when you founded Binance, could you maybe elaborate a bit your vision that you had when you started it, and how close you got to this vision, and what's missing? Is there something missing, or you're already having the next vision on how to further improve the project that you started some years ago? So that would be great to hear, and floor is yours.
Sure. Well, first, Robert, thanks for having me, and thanks for everyone for listening in. I think, to be very frank, to be very honest, we did evolve over, well, at least for me personally, I think my mentality did evolve over a few different stages. I joined the crypto industry in 2013. I came across Bitcoin in 2013, quit my job, sold my house in early 2014, and jumped into the industry. Running a crypto exchange is not a new idea. Everybody in this industry probably had the idea at some point in their sort of experience. In 2017, when we first launched Binance, it was really just to provide to be very honest, just provide a better exchange experience for users. We thought we could do better. We thought there's a high chance for us to be able to do better in terms of both system performance, customer support, product user experience, coverage on coins, coverage on different languages, being more international, etc. So we thought we had a shot at it. At the beginning, to be very honest, it was just to make a viable business, just to make sure the product actually works, so we can launch it, people will actually use it. So at the beginning, it was just make sure this thing, the goal is just to make sure it's successful. Very luckily, I think we got very lucky in 2017. We caught the bull run of the ICO sort of a market, and Binance became very popular very quickly. And after we became popular, well, after we became cash flow positive, we thought, well, what's the bigger goal here? I joined the crypto industry in 2013, 2014 because I believed in crypto, I believed in Bitcoin, and I think this is the future. And then in 2018, 2019, we thought, okay, well, let's shoot for a slightly higher goal. Let's try to help increase the freedom of money for people all around the world. So the exchange is just providing access. So by that, we want to have people access crypto more easier. By access, there's many different meanings. The exchange provides access to liquidity for people who wants to buy and sell. We then acquired multiple wallets. Trust Wallet is now the #1 mobile wallet in the space. And we acquired CoinMarketCap, which provides access to information. We're developing other services. So now the Binance goal is not just being the exchange. We want to provide infrastructure services for this industry. And hopefully by doing that, help increase the freedom of money for people all around the world. So that's kind of a few different evolutions along the way. We didn't really start with a grand mission, etc. Yeah, to be very frank.
That's always good to hear, because everybody in the aftermath looks like a visionary, but sometimes it's more powerful to just be honest about it and say, like, look, we just wanted to join the game, and it's nice to hear that also from people that are as successful as you. So it gives hope to others like me that there's still a way in the future. So that's cool.
There's a couple of intermediate steps as well. Like before Binance, I was trying to achieve financial freedom for myself, right? So it was like, okay, everyone wants to achieve financial freedom before you have that, you want to achieve that. Just before I started Binance, I may have had that if I kept my living standards in a relatively moderate rate. The second thing was let's help the team to achieve financial freedom. And then it was after that, it was like, yeah, well, let's think about bigger goals. So it was kind of an evolution, to be very frank.
No, that's great to hear. And I mean, thanks for this insight, because that's really great to know. But looking at, maybe the next step already, as we want to discuss today, connecting CeFi and DeFi. And, DeFi been on the rise all over the place. And I know that Binance is basically like in the middle between the two. How would you see this going forward? what do you think will happen in the future? Do you think they will operate in parallel, or do you think one will take over the other? What's your view, and maybe also the business perspective that you take for yourself and Binance for the future? Because that's probably you might be one of the the game setters here, by leading by example. So please share your views on that with us.
Sure. Sure, I'll share a little bit. So I think our philosophy or our approach is a little bit more generic. There's a couple of principles in play here. I think number one, the first principle is very important, that we follow the users. Wherever users go, we follow them. And this is very different from where many people follow idealistic ideals. They want pure decentralization, and decentralization is the end goal. And or they want centralization, or they want they want to be regulatory compliant, they want to be other things. We want to do all of those things, but we want to follow where the users are. So we want to provide products that people use in a compliant and safe, secure way. So that's the number one overriding principle. We follow the users, and we believe the mass number of users have good intentions and are good. So that's the number one principle. Number two is I believe that the interesting things happen at the intersections of different mediums. So if we jump straight to the truly decentralized, the utopia, everything's fully decentralized. Number one, we can't achieve that in one step. Number two, there's only very little guys. There's very few users there. To be very frank, today 99% of the population is still in fiat. So most DeFi cannot service fiat on-ramps. They just doesn't work. DeFi is great. I love DeFi personally, and we want to encourage technology innovation. But the interesting thing happens at the intersection of decentralized versus centralized fiat world, where the centralized exchanges still are more popular today. So the numbers show that. So from that perspective, for me, like so having said that, many people have the misconception thinking that Binance is really married to the centralized exchange, that we want to protect the centralized exchange, etc. So I want to encourage people to think of at Binance, we think of ourselves as the early Netflix running DVD shops. And they knew that DVD wasn't the future. We know that centralized exchanges most likely will not be the future. The future is DeFi. But before the blockchains gets faster, a lot of infrastructure gets all built out, we may not be able to realize that away. Very similar to Netflix didn't start with streaming services because the internet wasn't fast enough. So having that view, I think we will continue to experiment both in CeFi and DeFi. We want to offer, but I think right now in the short term, the most interesting business is actually going to happen. Most value is actually going to be provided at the intersection of DeFi and CeFi and the traditional fiat world. So we want to, so even though as interesting as DeFi is, we still need to bring 99% of the population from fiat world using fiat on-ramps, banking gateways to get them into the crypto. Most of them will probably buy Bitcoin first, and then they will look at other cryptocurrencies. So that's kind of our view. So we see a spectrum of things developing at the same time, and we don't take an extreme view where we only bet on DeFi or we only bet on CeFi. I think that's the wrong approach. There will be a spectrum of things for different level of users, and we want to provide access to most of it, to as much of it as we can.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because even though the one product might be better for the future or in the future, there's still a need for education, right? Because otherwise people are scared. I mean, there's the traditional situation where you say like, look, this is great, this is new, and the person looks at it as like, yeah, but how do I use it and what does it do, And I think we're still at the stage where you have to educate people about the impact that DeFi might have, the what's new about it. And me sitting in Brussels and having to educate policymakers or help them rather to understand what DeFi is, it's very difficult because it's still so in flux, it's still so early stage and to develop, and there's not even a definition, when you ask somebody, and we have a panel after that tries to do that. But when you ask somebody, can you tell me what DeFi is? The person will give you an answer, and then you ask the person next to the panel, and they will give you a totally different answer, and they're both probably right. And the question then for me is, because you're one of the gatekeepers basically of driving this, as you're saying yourself, you try to connect this, you try to drive people to the more innovative space. How do you do that? How do you take them? I mean, how do you try to educate them by what you're doing? Is there a way that, or is there a learning that you have based on the work you did in the last years that you say like, that actually worked, that picks it up, that makes people understand what we're trying to do?
I think there's no, well, based on the last few years of our trying that, we worked really hard on educating people, bring people into the industry, etc. I think there's no magic bullets there. Different people learn using different mechanisms. I think so. We have a very large educational effort within Binance. We launched Binance Academy very early on, and it's actually one of the most useful ways for us to bring users into this industry. I think if you ask most people, they probably have read a couple articles on Binance Academy, but reading only does so much. We also have like live classes in Africa called master classes, and each day we educate about 1,000 people or so. And they run master classes 200 days a year. So almost every working day, there's a class going on. We used to run them offline in physical locations where we only get a few hundred, but now we run them online. We actually get more audiences. But education is just one part. One thing I typically find is some people have to have a little bit of crypto to understand it. Just reading about blockchain wallets and stuff is not the same as downloading a Bitcoin wallet, receive $100 and then try to transfer it to some other friend overseas, and see how it works. It may be BNB may be more expensive in the transaction fees. You can try BTC may be expensive in the transaction fees. You could try BNB and stuff like that. So I think having a little bit, what I find is for my close friends, I like to somehow pay them or give them a little bit in crypto, and then they will usually learn much faster after that. So there's no magic bullet there, and we want to and there's a lot of these conferences which are really helpful as well for people. Many people prefer this type of environment to learn, and but I think there's no magic bullet. And fundamentally, though, I think what you said is right. Is for an average person to learn about DeFi from not having any crypto, it takes a while. So it's a huge leap. So we like to bring people in incrementally, where we expose them. Most people who are not in crypto are more comfortable using an email password login instead of backing up their own private seed and then worry about not losing it, etc. So we try to provide all options to users and try to educate them through that process. But what we find is we have to do it incrementally. We can't bring somebody on the street that have never owned a Bitcoin or have never held a Bitcoin in their wallet directly into DeFi. That just doesn't work. So we try to take the incremental approach. I don't think there's any silver bullets. It's a long journey, but we got to start somewhere.
No, I totally agree. And we can tell, in the work we do at Brussels levels, you can really see that the people dealt with crypto, and then you're talking with them about crypto. They're completely at a different level than the ones that, they're just reading the FT or maybe Politico or something like that. And then hear always those headlines, mostly negative, simply because the news are mostly negative, unfortunately. I wish there would be like a positive news outlet that only reports the great things humanity does. Actually, I think it would be good for society, and then crypto would probably look also, or would be perceived completely different. But when you looked at that, and Binance is a global company, do you see different markets behaving differently? Could you, for example, tell like Europe behaves different than the US or Asia or Africa, or they're all at the same stage, or what helps basically regionally to promote that? Is there a difference?
Yes, I think there's absolutely a lot of differences. Everybody thinks crypto is the same, but it's different everywhere. We see a lot of differences. So I think this is more of a generalization, but so there will be definitely exceptions, etc. But for example, in mature markets in US, they're more technology driven. So DeFi is very hot there. There's many people who are very advanced in DeFi, etc. The regulatory landscape in US is very heavily focused on KYC, AML, anti-terrorists. So there's a lot of checks there, and they have very strong regulations. luckily they actually have very clear regulations, but the regulations are relatively heavy. So you don't see that many exchanges operating in the US, but the ones that are operating are quite strong and quite big. So US is care about that. Whereas the same definition of anti-money laundering, for example, in China is different. And money laundering in China means taking money out of China. That's money laundering. So the checks, the processes, the regulations, they are all very different by jurisdiction. And China does not welcome crypto exchanges, period. So, but they do allow people to hold cryptocurrency to hold Bitcoin, and up until now, they were relatively favorable to, like, say, miners. But now I think that mentality may have changed. So now there's a shift. And then if you look at like Japan allows crypto exchanges to register, they issue licenses, but they limit number of coins you can list for exchanges. So they don't have what we call altcoin exchanges in Japan, or at least not that big. And they limit a number of other things. So Korea is different. Korea allow all coins to be listed on exchanges. So there's a proliferation of different projects there. But they don't allow ICOs to be issued in Korea. So there's less technical projects running out of Korea right now. Africa is a different one. Africa has less traditional financial infrastructure. So we're just waiting for them to get on the mobile smartphone bandwagon. Now it's increasing. But even like a couple of years ago, the smartphone penetration rate is quite low, and the banking penetration rate is very low. I think only 11% of people have bank accounts in Africa. And so they actually don't need bank accounts now. They can just go directly from like mobile payments directly into crypto. And so different parts of the world are very, very different. I can't iterate through all of them, but just to give an idea, and smaller countries are typically more relaxed in regulations because they can deal with projects on case-by-case basis, whereas large countries usually have like very black and white, hard pressed regulations that impacts the industry development. So, and there's still many countries with no clear guidelines on how blockchain business should work. There's still a lot of debates, etc. So each place is very, very different from our perspective, or based on our experience. So in order to run a global, so blockchain is actually very global. Bitcoin, anybody can use it globally, but as a business in this industry, you have to tailor your services very differently in different regions. So that unfortunately is the case right now. It's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity.
Talking about great opportunities, or maybe not, we're sitting in Brussels. I'm European, so I will ask you also about the one continent that you didn't mention. When you think about Europe, what do you think? What do you think for yourself? I mean, you mentioned like the US, as being like very AML driven. Africa totally jumping on innovation because they can basically. Asia a bit like nuance to the US. What when you think about Europe, and we're currently working on our market in crypto assets regulation. So probably Europe will be the first big region globally that will have a consistent, comprehensive crypto assets framework dealing with exchanges and custodians and so on. Is this something that you, as somebody that sees this global, and you just showcased that, is this something positive, or is this something that's too early, maybe, or maybe more broadly speaking, what's your view on Europe? What do we need to do to maybe catch up to the others, or do we need to catch up to the others? I mean, please be honest and frank, because we need to hear that.
Sure. Apologize for not mentioning Europe. Europe is actually a very interesting case as well. There's a few advantages and disadvantages for Europe. Europe is an established economy, so people are generally, number one, relatively wealthy compared to the rest of the world. And number two, relatively well educated. Their education literacy rate in Europe is quite high. There's also, Europe has the European Union, which has many countries sharing one currency, which doesn't exist almost anywhere else in the world. Having countries with that, the countries have less of a national currency mentality. So many countries are very much married to their own currency, and some of the people in the government may not want to let it go. Whereas this kind of mentality is much weaker in Europe, and as a result, actually, crypto usage adoption has been high in Europe, even from like 2013 or 2014. If you look at like Brussels, Amsterdam, other places in Europe, the usage adoption is actually has always been quite high. Europe, based on my experience, has not been so high on the mining side, on the exchange side, etc. So Europe has more been an early adopter. And Europe, to be honest, there are strong technology companies in Europe, but Europe does not have as many strong internet startups compared to, like, for example, US or China, etc. So Europe is slightly more segmented in terms of the sort of innovation aspect. But I do think Europe is very progressive in terms of coming up with regulations which are relatively favorable to crypto development. Banks are not allowed to hold crypto now. Banks are allowed to offer crypto services. So it's relatively forward thinking in this respect. I think that's great for the industry. To be very frank, most of the first iterations of regulations around the world will be somewhat restrictive, because they'd be borrowing from traditional financial sectors to apply to crypto, and crypto fundamentally is different. But I think Europe probably has the highest potential of piloting many of the sort of regulations for this industry, which are somewhat favorable to the industry. So I think that's a really, really good sign. And I think that's a net positive for the industry for sure. So yeah, I mean, there's also a number of countries in Europe have issued guidelines, etc., and they're clearly working on advancing the sort of clarity on regulations for this industry, which I think is totally positive. I don't think there's that many negative stuff. There will always be restrictions on business here and there, but it's always a trade-off. And I think basically right now, the almost all regulators, especially the ones in Europe, are learning a lot about crypto, and the crypto business are hiring many regulators onto like, for example, our teams and their own teams. So hopefully we can bridge the gap. And I think it's all very positive, and just takes time to work through many of the issues, etc.
Thanks, CC. That's actually very positive, much more than I expected. So that's great. Thinking about, one of the aspects, and I mentioned regulation before, and, one of the things that were very heavily discussed in the regulation piece were NFTs. And I know that that's an upcoming topic, and I know that you guys also are looking into this. So maybe could you present a bit your view on NFTs and that Binance have, and where do you think this is going? Is this something that is like a nice, like a pop-up for 2021, or is this something that you can see a real business in the future for, and how could that look like?
Sure. So to be very frank, my view on NFTs are pretty rudimentary. My understanding of NFTs are pretty rudimentary. I've talked to a few guys who are very deep in this NFT space, and I'm quoting quite a lot of what they said, which I learned. I think fundamentally, NFTs are huge. It's a market that most people don't realize how big it is. But to be honest, as with all blockchain technologies, all the potentials are huge. Crypto payments was supposed to be very big, but it hasn't really taken off. NFTs are actually showing signs of taking off for sure. But fundamentally, though, if you look at 2017, the ICOs or the blockchain fundraising offered a way for entrepreneurs like us to raise money globally and then hopefully build a viable business after that. Of course, most new businesses fail, so we will see a lot of failures. The NFTs now offer artists and content creators a way to monetize their work, to offer them a new business model that wasn't available to them before. And this now allows them to reach audiences all around the world. Again, I think fundamentally this concept is very, very powerful. How big it will get, what kind of impact it will have, depends a lot on the execution. And Binance being one of the largest user communities in the space, we want to offer our users access to NFTs, and we also want to offer content creators access to our user base. So given that, based on the preliminary exposure I've had with our NFT teams, there's just so much interest. Like all the major content creators that you can think of in the world, including like comic books, movie producers, music, any digital artists, they're all thinking about NFTs. So I think, and this is great for crypto because when those guys first issue NFTs, the initial buyers will probably be the crypto industry, but those guys will also bring their own fan base who are outside of crypto into the NFT world, which basically into the crypto world, which is also great. So I think the potential is very, very high. I think I underestimated how big that will be until I get more involved and talking to the teams, etc. So I think that's very core fundamentally that they're very unique and creative business models that can be made using NFTs. It just wasn't clear to me before, but I think the potential is huge. So I really hope that it will take off.
Just out of curiosity then, so is it possible then in your opinion that we maybe have the next Nike sneaker launch on Binance, or instead of issuing or selling it on Amazon, we have like an NFT by J.K. Rowling, something like that? Could you envision that?
Well, yeah. So I don't want to associate with any specific names because we actually have discussions with almost every brand name out there. So, but yeah, totally possible what you mentioned, and including like so any merchandise, any IP, any book, any new shoes, any sports team, any racing car team, any movie producer, any music producer, they can now issue NFTs that can represent different things that we didn't even imagine before. And like this may be a slightly controversial topic, but in Japan, the AV stars are issue NFTs with a lot of interesting, like you can have tea with them, meet them in person, stuff like that. So very, very creative. So there's a lot of use cases that we have not thought about before. But again, takes exploration. Yeah.
No, I think that's the exciting bit about it, but that nobody really knows where it goes, and we're just waiting for basically the next great idea to pop up, and for somebody like you or anybody else in the crypto industry to pick it up and make it work. And I think that will be a lot of fun to see that. Looking also at the time, unfortunately, because it really flew. Could you maybe elaborate a bit? What's your plan for the next year or the next 18 months? What will happen in the Binance verse? Is there something big that you have planned, expansions or anything? Or if you can talk about it, obviously. Don't want to call you out here.
Yeah, I really wish that we had a plan like that. But Binance is so it's not that I don't want to share. It's just that we really don't have a plan like that. We especially don't have a midterm plan. We have a very short-term plan focusing on like immediate stuff that we're doing. And then we have a slightly longer term plan, like a 10-year, look, we just want to provide access to crypto. And we want to be the facilitator, the infrastructure player. The midterm is really hard to predict. So Binance is not run from a top-down organization. Internally, we don't use the word company that much even. In Binance, I don't have a strategy that gets split into multiple sub-strategies and then into different products people execute. I find that don't work very well because when I have an idea and ask somebody else to do it, they don't quite do a very good job at it because it's not their idea. Whereas if they have an idea, they want to do it and they come to me for say, hey, CZ, I need this budget. I want to do this project. Like, sounds good. And they just go off and do it. And they usually do a great job. So in Binance, we have many independent teams that are working on different projects, some of them overlapping, and they just do different stuff. NFT is a great example. We have multiple teams working on multiple NFT platforms, and some are centralized, some are decentralized, and they'll just make it work, and we'll see which one the users pick. It's not so much a competition. It's just like we run as a much more bottom-up, decentralized organization. So yeah, it's very hard to tell like in 18 months what products we're gonna have, not have. What we're currently working on that we're working on NFT platforms. We're working on Binance Payment, which is it's actually a big concept. In addition to just scanning a QR code and pay somebody, it's a marketplace. There's a mini program. People can embed their shops. People can embed third-party apps onto the marketplace. So I think it's a much larger concept than most people realize. We'll see if the teams can achieve it. We are continuing to improve our fiat access, more fiat on-ramps around the world, more regulated local exchanges in different jurisdictions. That's fully compliant, fully to the local regulations. We're working to improve our spot offerings. We're improving our futures offerings. So that's just a lot of stuff. I actually can't iterate through all of it. Yeah, so it's very random. Like I usually I very often find out on Twitter after a product launches. So that's how Binance works.
That must be an exciting work environment when you're not knowing what's happening next. I mean, that's really amazing. That's cool.
I think it's okay. I think most people, I think we just use common sense. Like if somebody wants to spend millions of dollars, they probably will ask me. If they want to spend like a couple $1,000s on the project. So we have even though we're not top-down driven, we still have a somewhat of a hierarchy involved. So different people know use common sense, knows their limits, and then they push things. And then but when launching products, they very often don't tell me, and I usually find out after they're launched. So Binance Smart Chain is one of those examples where I learned how to use Binance Smart Chain, reading the blog article that the team posted on Twitter, finding the link on Twitter, and then learning about how to use Binance Smart Chain, downloading the MetaMask wallet, configuring it. So I learned as a user how to use that myself, following a link. They didn't tell me beforehand. So but I think that's okay. From our perspective, from my perspective, we are the facilitator. We're the bootstrappers again. So if different project teams needs funding, needs marketing help, needs user introductions, etc., we're the facilitators. We provide the budget. We assume that is a decent team. We provide the support for them to do their job well. It's not that I need to figure out what they do. They need to figure out what they do. So I don't have a blueprint on, especially like midterm. 18-month range to like three-year range is very hard to predict which product's going to come out. We don't have a plan like that.
Yeah, that's in a crypto ecosystem or blockchain ecosystem. That's nearly a decade, based on my experience. That's quite long term indeed. I mean, you've been talking about applying reason, and that's something that's basically been adopted late this night, and just because it's circulating everywhere right now. El Salvador is the first country that basically adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. Do you think that was a reasonable decision, or what's your view on that?
Oh, I think that's a great decision. So most people have the wrong view, that thinking that Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies weaken the power of governments because governments used to issue their own currency, and the currency is viewed as a strong tool for managing the economy, adjusting the rates, etc. But I think that's totally backwards. The smarter guys figure out, number one, government interventions or with the economy is usually not so good. And when you have multiple central banks all around the world trying to influence the economy, the dynamics is very, very hard to predict. What you want is really give people a strong economy structure so that people can flourish. And when the citizens are able to operate with very sound money, they can now do businesses without worrying much about different policies around different parts of the world that may impact their local business, etc. So, for example, some bigger country can make a rule that impacts the economy in one country, whereas using cryptocurrencies now makes the individuals much more solvent. And when the individuals are much more solvent, that country when all the citizens in the country becomes wealthier, that country also becomes more solvent because that country also has more influence on the global stage, and that country will have a stronger economy. And having a stronger economy is much better than a government that doesn't control their own currency, but having the local strong economy is much better, much stronger than a government that has total control over the economy, but the economy over a much smaller economy. So I think the smarter leaders are realizing that, and for nations to adopt cryptocurrencies, to adopt Bitcoin, increases the sovereignty of that nation. Most nations are influenced by foreign exchange rates, etc. But by adopting cryptocurrency, they actually get away from that. They become much stronger. So and Europe is actually a good example of different countries abandoning their own currency and adopting a common one. Works quite well. And if they take that one step further to adopt Bitcoin, Bitcoin is the most sound money today. So that's good for the countries and that's good for the industry. So I think that's a super smart move. I'm really just surprised that not more people have done that yet. It took a while, but it's great to see that now it's happening. And when it's happening really fast. Like a few days ago, we heard about El Salvador, and then a couple of days later, there's like 6-7 countries or jumped in. So hopefully we'll see more and more of that. I think that's great.
I totally agree. And thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I really appreciate that you took the time in your busy calendar. It's a pity that we couldn't do that in person. Otherwise, I think we could have been a bit longer. And but nonetheless, thanks for taking the time, CeFi. Really appreciate it. And also for the great insights that you shared with us.
Sure, Robert, thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for your support.
Thanks, guys. And thank you, CeFi. And I have to unfortunately hand over to my next panel. So Elise, over to you.